All right, this week marks the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, one of the most devastating natural disasters in American history. While the storm struck New Orleans hardest, at least closest to us, I would argue that Pass Christian took the brunt of Katrina. New Orleans got a flood. They didn't get a hurricane, but they got a flood, and they certainly had impacts that were felt right here in the Houston area. So we want to talk about that. Our doors were open to these people, hundreds of thousands of evacuees. We provided shelter and support and a second chance for a lot of people who literally lost everything.
Well, joining us now is the man who led the city of Houston's response, former Mayor Bill White. He was at the helm of our city in 2005, leading an extraordinary effort that turned our city into a haven in a time of crisis. Mayor, I want to welcome you to Hello Houston.
It's great to be here, and I'm glad to be on NPR. You know, I watch this, scholarly TV show, South Park, and a few weeks ago I said that NPR was off the air, and I thought, oh, my goodness.
Well, NPR has survived, happy to say.
There you go.
And if you out there listening would like to join the conversation, you can give us a call or text us at 713-440-8870. Mayor, I want you to take us back, if you would, to that time. You were about to face re-election. You'd been in office about 2 years at that point. Looked like you were going to coast to victory once again. But I remember in your inaugural address, the first time, you said you encouraged Houstonians to embrace strangers, embrace outsiders. Little did you know.
Little did I know. We're a city where most people, the overwhelming majority of people, including me, have moved here from somewhere else. So, we're used to, we're a city where people get to know each other and they treat each other. It doesn't matter who your daddy was or how long you've been here. If you're a Houstonian, you're as important as anybody else. Somebody may have a more important job, but that doesn't mean they're more important.
What was the planning like with Katrina? I remember all of the anchors in New Orleans that Monday afternoon saying, well, it looks like New Orleans dodged a bullet again and no problems. And then, of course, the levees failed and the whole city flooded, especially the Ninth Ward. What was the decision tree going on back here in Houston? What's going to happen? What are we going to do to help? What's that process like?
Frank, I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning during those days where I was serving the public here and look at the National Hurricane Center and followed Katrina. We had part of a regional effort that many people don't know about, but major fire departments have people deployed around major areas that may hit a hurricane. I knew that our guys were out there with boats and stuff in case there was a big storm surge. But then, like you, I tuned in on the national news, and people were, surveying the streets, and that looked like, there were some trees down and all, but looked okay. I got a call and talked to the head of Shell USA that morning. He said, hey, I just want you to know the levees have been breached. And I knew exactly what that meant because I'd read a book called Control of Nature by John McPhee, and it was part of the book was about what would happen if the levees burst in New Orleans. And so I know that if you knock out the water system, you knock out your power system, and you have a bunch of buildings with water in them, and nobody can inhabit the city, and there's mold damage, then the city would become uninhabitable. So I did call all the department heads and senior staff of the city, said that I'm going to be busy for, I think it's going to be months, make sure that everything is done with the citizens of Houston are taken care of because I'm going to have a big job in front of me. And then I began sort of making calls. I think the first one was for the lead director of Walmart, tell him I need Walmart supply chain.
Yeah, that was the memory that my colleague, former reporter Ryan Korsgaard, and I mentioned this morning at the 10-year anniversary. So there's some supply chain logistic issues, and ironically, an ally in Walmart. Talk to us about that.
Well, that was just one of many. Look, the Red Cross has set up for sheltering for 24 to 72 hours. So they had Red Cross shelters around. FEMA has the same as sort of a parallel plan that hurricane hits, somebody may be out of their house, you put them in a tent or a shelter and have a cots available and for 48, 64 hours at most. But I knew that, as Frank had mentioned, this wasn't really hurricane damage. It was the breach of the levees that caused a city that was below sea level to be underwater and uninhabitable for an indefinite period of time. And I knew it'd take a long, long time because, the whole water system and power system is knocked out, and then you have to scrape all the buildings that were going to be mold damaged. So I knew it was going to be an extended period of time. And, I just started calling corporations. I called the next call. I started calling the Catholic bishop and the heads of mega churches. Said, get on your line, send out emails. I'm going to need tens of thousands of volunteers. And then we set up shelters. We, kicked the conventions out of the George R. Brown, and it took the county a couple of days to do the same thing with Reliant so that we would have some beds. And then, just to dial forward, my big thought was, we can't have Americans living in shelters for weeks and months on end. So we need to have a program where we can get people as quick as we can into apartments. Every vacant apartment we can find, and rehab some that we can on transit lines so they can get their kids back in school if they have kids, because they're at the beginning of a school year. And you know what happens if kids, are a month or 2 months out of school, they're behind that school year, and it can affect their self-esteem, learning, et cetera. And, we want people to go out and get jobs if they're able-bodied so that they can look forward and not back. So that was a big task.
So I recall that the Astrodome area, of course, there was so much focus on the Astrodome because so many evacuees ended up in the Astrodome. But also there was an effort there to sign people up for school, as you say, housing vouchers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember you were calling a meeting, I think on a daily basis, if
we had meetings between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock for about 90 straight days at the George R. Brown. We would have, the FEMA people would be there, but, FEMA has, limited resources, and at the time it was pretty incompetent. I mean, our local people were pretty good. They were ex-military, but they didn't. How do you deal with over 200,000 people? And, they didn't have that. So it was heads of corporations, major nonprofits, faith-based organizations, as well as city, county officials. Probably about 90 people around a horseshoe table, and then every morning we went through basic needs, what people were seeing, and it was very detailed progress on what we needed to do in order to first provide relief, and then get people into apartments with furnishings and electricity and get on with their lives. Job training, virtual pharmacies, medical needs, you name it. That's what we dealt with.
Good time to bring in Rick Noriega, representative who was your incident commander during Katrina.
Right.
I think he's on the line. Rick, what's your take on that, your memory of it?
Well, I think that we saw what leadership looks like under Mayor Bill White. And as a result of all this, he was recognized by the Kennedy Center as a profile in courage. I recall when the mayor was getting calls of people that said, oh, well, we're going to have conventions at the George R. Brown. He says, well, I'm sorry, these things are going to be occupied, and if y'all have an issue, you're just going to have to take it to the courts or something. But we've got a duty here as citizens of not just the city, of this country, et cetera, in addition to what the mayor created at the George R. Brown Convention Center was a city within the convention center with not just activities for families, et cetera, but the innovation of doing things, of the triage efforts as buses rolled in with people that were still wet, needing prescription drugs and the like. And as the mayor described, the lack of cots, we quickly moved towards inflatable mattresses and doubled them up for senior citizens that couldn't get down on the floors and things of that nature. And the outpour of of effort by the citizens of Houston for our neighbors. I was most impressed with the mayor when I was honored to accompany him to Second Baptist Church for a Sunday sermon, and the mayor gave a speech about the city on the hill in a biblical context that was just super powerful. So I've never been more proud of our city than when Bill White led that effort.
Well, I think we were all very proud of Mayor White, absolutely. Let me ask y'all quickly, could we pull this off today? There's another incident like this?
I hope so. I mean, it is some of the lessons, and, Rick Noriega's on the line. Many citizens may not know one of the reasons I called on Rick was he had set up virtual city in Afghanistan, okay, shortly before we called on him. So I was looking for competence, okay? So it's not only compassion. There's plenty of people in politics who get up in a microphone, they can give a good speech, but it really depends on having people who are competent managers who don't simply rely on our good, hardworking, decent emergency professionals, but if something like this happened to another city and the whole population streamed to Houston, you need managerial talent, which is what we were looking for. So at a time when the nation was looking at FEMA, who didn't seem to know what they were doing. Actually, there's one incident. They had contracted $500 million, it was, to bring these cruise ships into Galveston where they were going to put people in them. And, FEMA had its orders, and I had the HPD, restrain. I mean, it was a little interesting situation. And finally got, at the time, Congressman DeLay on the line. He said, stop this. They got orders from Brownie, I guess Bush called him, to put all these people on boats. But what we didn't want people to be isolated in these trailer camps as they were in places in Louisiana and Arkansas. We wanted them to look, forward and not back, and get on with their lives.
Did you play a pretty big role with the county judge?
Yeah, Robert Eccles, he was there with me every day at those meetings. We didn't let there weren't any partisan divisions or anything like that. Neither of us, we clamped down on any grandstanding in these meetings, including with people like the head of the AFL-CIO came up, and I told him, "Nate, you interrupt that. No, we have a rule against any speeches. It has to be, here's a problem. If you want to volunteer something to solve the problem, listen to the meeting, then you're welcome, and the chair recognizes you. Otherwise, we turn off the microphone."
That's true leadership in action, Mayor. YouTube, Alex is saying, treat all neighbors with compassion no matter where they are from.
Yes.
Let us never fear to live out this calling. It sounds like during this crisis, you did that.
Child, there was this one day, just another anecdote. I know y'all have some agenda, but so leaders of the Vietnamese American community, of which is a very strong group of citizens and residents of our community, called me. We met at the Hong Kong Mall over on the west side, and I thought, okay, I started in on, here's some of the things that we can do. I know there's maybe people that in need, and then I was interrupted. Oh, Mayor, let's stop right there. We called a meeting. Yeah, we have our agenda. There are several thousand people from southern Louisiana, often in the fishing community, that were Vietnamese Americans. We're taking care of them, and we're taking care of people in our community that are, that what we want to know. We came here as refugees. We know what it's like to be evacuated. We want you to tell us how we can help the fellow citizens and residents of the United States who are coming here now as evacuees. That's what they wanted. And there were a lot of people who, had motels, and we needed rooms. And so the community, I said, not only the motels, but you got to provide food, and if they need clothes, do whatever you need. they stepped up.
Listen,
and lots
as,
of people
as the daughter of Vietnamese immigrants who evacuated and came here myself, I appreciate that story. I think in a case like that, in the diaspora of people coming to Houston, it's an opportunity to pay back. Right?
Exactly.
To give back.
Exactly.
What was the timeline getting it all back to normal? I know that the Astrodome was full of people for about 3 weeks, it seems like.
Yeah.
And then some of those people were evacuated because of Rita.
Yeah. So
People forget about Rita. That was 3 weeks later.
Yeah. Rita came on top of that, which did strain. We knew that the medical system. I mean, we set up virtual hospitals in the two big shelters and rehabilitated a closed hospital in Southwest Houston. There was a massive effort coming into Ellington to transport the people who were in the hospitals in the southern Louisiana area, and then we had to do the same with hospitals that were in the flood-prone area during Rita. So, that taxed us. But to answer your question, it took about 90 to 100 days before we were able at the peak to get 34,500 apartments with an average of like 3.1 people in them. People saw the shelters clear out, but there were hotels and motels that were throughout this area. It's not everybody. A lot of people came. I think probably by my estimate about 80,000, something like that, were here in hotels and motels and in churches and with friends and relatives where they evacuated because they thought, oh, well, the power may be out. We'll go back home in a couple of days. Well, they weren't going to stay in a hotel or motel forever, and they needed to get on with their lives. So first were the shelters, then the hotels and motels, and some of the temporary shelters that the Red Cross had and church congregations and others had all around the city. It took about 100 days to do it.
But as I recall, there was a backlash. There was a spike in certain crimes in certain areas.
Yeah.
And there was, for all of the opening of hearts and so on, there was an element in the city that said, we don't want these people here, right?
Yeah. No, so I went to a number of town hall meetings. You're absolutely right, Doug. And some of the pastors of mega churches, I could name a few, that had encouraged they heard from members of the congregation. Here's the facts. The facts are that the murder rate in New Orleans was 6 times Houston's murder rate. The fact is that, and by the way, the year before Katrina hit, only 40% of the people who were indicted for murder in New Orleans actually went to trial because the evidence gathering was so poor. They had gangs that had accumulated in the projects, turf wars, all human beings, but human beings that had major challenges. And, I spoke to the evacuees, and that was a tiny percentage of the evacuees. For Houstonians, what I said is what is just a fact, that suppose Houston had to evacuate, all of us had to leave Houston and go to other cities, every person. I sure wouldn't want to be judged by somebody who was a burglar or, criminal, and you can't, a few bad apples. We did have a special program for the criminals called the jail, and we had, it was a special housing program. We did do very aggressive policing within the law in the areas that were high crime areas, which we identified where the gangs had reconstituted. And by March, April, the crime rate was down to normal. And a year after Katrina, it was below what it was before Katrina.
And when the storm clouds had cleared and weeks afterward, Houston's reputation nationwide was raised. I remember I went to a fancy dinner up in the Northwest in Portland about a month or so later, and someone heard that I was from Houston. She tinked her wine glass and lifted her wine glass and said, "To Houston." They toasted us. Did you pick that up all over when you traveled around, talked to people in other cities? Did you hear that from people in other cities?
At the time and for quite a while, I did not travel from Houston, but there were many people who shared the same anecdote that that you did. And of course, I know people who would email me throughout the nation, and especially from Louisiana. There was a whole group of people who was running the New York Marathon that year, and they had some T-shirts on as a group that had Houston on it. And a couple of members of that group said, whenever we'd go by, there was all this people chanting about Houston, and we thought that's sort of cool, that's interesting. And then they realized what was happening is that people had seen Houston as a center of competence in the nation when so much of the national response was chaotic. So it certainly was good for our reputation, but even more so, it created a sense of unity and common purpose within our city. And I will tell you that, y'all may know that I attended, services every Sunday, full services, sometimes two, in different parts of the city. I think it did a lot for the relationships with our larger community and many African Americans when they saw that Houstonians, the vast majority of Houstonians, when the national news was talking about, primarily African American and using racial characterizations of we just saw fellow Americans. That's all we saw, and that's how we responded.
And that is the Houston spirit, Mayor White. It's such a pleasure to reconnect and have you on this show.
Yeah, thank
Mayor
you for
White,
being here.
yeah, it's been great to walk down
Good to see
memory
you again.
lane.
Yeah, you bet. You take care. Thank y'all.
Thank you.